So today on our program, we're talking with Matt Cox. He has written an article for Actify Press called Black Panther versus Batman, Social Influence on Comic Book Heroes. So Matt, welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
It's great to have you. So why don't we just jump on in? So first, let's talk about you a bit. Tell us about your journey that you took to become a considerable lefty here.
Well, I guess I'd have to say that the journey has been ongoing. I don't really think that it ever stops, so to speak. I was raised with the idea that the Democrats were sort of the heroes in the political world. In fact, instead of cops and robbers, we played Democrats and Republicans. but as I got older, I started just sort of looking around and kind of experimenting with different philosophies and reading and such. And then as I got a little bit more news savvy and learned what was going on in the world and what had gone on in history, I started to realize that the mainstream idea of left and right in America just doesn't really fit with anything that I considered, a just goal. And so I started just delving into more and more, I guess, leftist politics, and eventually came out in a narco-syndicalist. But, I consider myself idealistically an anarchist, but pragmatically a progressive, because, I think we need to get small term wins as we move towards a long-term goal. So.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So kind of we're going to pick up about talking about your piece a little bit here. So for those who actually aren't familiar with Black Panther or even Batman, can you give us a little bit of a background on each?
Well, of course, Batman is one of the iconic DC characters. He's been featured in numerous comic book series, cartoons, movies, TV shows, you name it. So he's basically the world's greatest detective, lost his parents, watched them get gunned down by a mugger when he was 8 years old, and from that day forward dedicated his life to vengeance. He swoops through Gotham on ropes and different kinds of technology and uses his brains and training to solve cases and fight bad guys. Similarly, but different, T'Challa was groomed to be the heir to the throne of Wakanda, a small African nation that consists of multiple tribes that live together. He was trained in combat, politics, basically everything, science, from a very early age. In that way, he is actually a lot like Batman, who I should have mentioned before was the heir to a billionaire fortune, and decided to use that fortune to amass an arsenal. But I digress. Anyways, Black Panther and Batman basically share the common training in both martial disciplines, science, and even detective work. Though Black Panther is not heralded as a great detective, he discovered Daredevil's true identity and infiltrated the Avengers with the intent of spying upon them. So he definitely has his detective chops.
So what got you interested in actually writing this then?
I think, and, I get these random thoughts about comic books. I grew up reading comic books all the time. Interestingly, I never actually read Black Panther or Batman when I was growing up, with the exception of like a couple of different books here and there. But I was thinking, there's always this desire to sort of match people up with their universal counterparts. There was even a couple of different times that they had the two universes, Marvel and DC, collide and created an amalgam comics for a while where they actually blended the characters. But I just kind of got the idea in my head that Black Panther is actually closer to Batman than anyone else who has been pointed out as his counterpart in the Marvel universe. Usually the comparison is made to Iron Man, the billionaire tech genius who fights crime. But, Iron Man is he's more of a defense contractor / energy mogul. And also he's wholly reliant on his tech. Batman uses his wits a lot more and, is a trained martial artist and basically an Olympic level athlete. So, it really falls apart when you consider that Tony Stark without his armor is just, Mark Zuckerberg.
So was that something that caused you to be interested in writing this piece particularly? Was kind of the gadgetry involved? And
yeah, I mean, as soon as I thought of that, I kind of looked into it on Google, where everybody goes, and I saw this Quora article where they were saying who's more intelligent, Black Panther or Batman, and with a couple of exceptions, the arguments were hands down Batman. Everybody was saying, "Oh yeah, Batman's done this, he's done that, he's got 100 degrees, he speaks 10 languages, he's mastered 127 martial arts." And I was thinking that doesn't really get into sort of the character's nuance. That's just listing things that the writers have had them do over and over. And the fact is, writers have to sort of up the ante every time that they introduce a character. And especially when you have one that's just been in a movie, a comic book writer has to sort of reflect that experience for the broader base that has been drawn in by the movie. And considering that Batman's had 9 movies just since 1989, appeared in at least 3 cartoon series, there's a TV show about his hometown when he was growing up, and he's basically a legend. I realized that it was really unfair to sort of make that comparison because T'Challa hasn't really accomplished less. He's just been featured less. So if you feature a character, if every 100 times you feature a character, you have to up the ante by a point, and Batman's been featured 200,000 times and T'Challa's been featured 2,000 times, then the writers just keep adding it there. It's not really intrinsic to the character. It's just kind of what the fans expect to make it a little bit more exciting this time.
So are those kind of those considerable, I guess that presentation or how many times Batman's been featured versus T'Challa, is that kind of why you think it's some of the challenges faced with the Black Panther comic series from becoming as popular as a Batman, or is there anything?
Clearly, Bob Kane wrote Batman in 1939. T'Challa, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby wrote Black Panther in 1966. So Batman already had 27 years of development going on when Black Panther came along. So the fact, just from that alone, he'd already had plenty of time to develop a fan base, etc. And it's hard when you are comparing fictional characters because you have not only the intrinsic character traits, but you have every single writer's take on it. And the fact that T'Challa has not been featured nearly as much as Batman means that he never got a chance to up his abilities every single time. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the sales for Black Panther were extremely low in the beginning because it was just really uncomfortable to see like, oh hey, there's a black hero now. He came around in a time when Batman was considered a hero for everybody, but Black Panther was considered like a niche figure. And while his sales were a little bit high amongst college students, he didn't have, again, that access. There were cartoons when I was growing up, like the Super Friends, that allowed more people, when they became old enough to buy comic books of their own, they were already aware of the character Batman. So when you go to the store and you see, Batman Batman's latest issue and you see Black Panther, you're like, oh, I have no idea what this Black Panther guy is. I'm going to go buy the one that I know. And that's actually how I began in comics. I bought the titles that I knew. Spider-Man, Batman. Well, not many Batman, but X-Men. I was more of a Marvel guy. So, which may also explain why I'm more in favor of Black Panther. But
so, why do you think that? Other than, I guess, people just not simply just avoiding the comic because they don't really know it, is there any other reason that has prevented Black Panther from becoming as popular as Batman?
Well, I mean, you just nail it down to racism, really. I don't expect that everybody who sees a Black Panther comic thinks, oh my God, this is a black guy and I'm not going to buy this because it's a black character. It's what it actually shows is the sort of pernicious internalized racism in the society, because in 1939, there were no black characters in comic books. Batman was written as a white person, but if you wanted to make his character now, he could have just as easily been Latino or Arab American or, a black man. So the fact that he was written in 1939 meant that there was no access for a black character. And then by the time Black Panther came along, there was already a fan base for all the white characters in the comic universes already deal with that intrinsic racism, as well as, building a fan base among even the more progressive comic book fans. So I'm not sure I'm the right person to explain it very well. I just saw it as like an inequality that couldn't be addressed by looking at the characters as they've had a chance to develop. It's like you see the surface level and you think, oh, this is all that there is. But if you don't dig down deep, you don't see the deeper meaning behind certain things that happen. I know I'm not explaining this well, but
I think that feeds into this implicit versus explicit biases that people hold. And so implicit and explicit racism is part of that narrative of implicit and explicit biases, which is not overt racism. It's just implicit. It just is something that because of culture, you kind of learn these things. And so you have kind of expectations or stereotypes that are very kind of tough to even break away from. So again, we're still talking with Matt Cox today. He has written an article called Black Panther versus Batman, Social Influence on Comic Book Heroes. And so Matt, in your opinion, do you think Bruce Wayne, who happens to be heir of a family fortune, or T'Challa, who was born into royalty, who is more privileged?
Well, I mean, ultimately, both of them were born in a station of power, essentially. But when you look at not just them, but what they have to deal with in society around them, Bruce Wayne was born in Gotham, which, is in America. I think that they've actually pinned it down to New Jersey. Like I said, I never actually read Batman growing up as like a fan. I just, he was in, again, like 9 movies and 20 different TV series, but it was definitely in America. So when you have T'Challa, who was born royal, but in a country that was constantly beset by looters and colonists and, these different social pressures that you don't face in Gotham, even though you do have massive corruption and lots of weird villains, it's not the same, because while Batman, of course, watches his city experience lots and lots of difficulty, it doesn't really touch him because he's a billionaire on a hill with a massive estate. And T'Challa is the ruler of a people to whom he has responsibility. His wealth, his station, his position, and his people are all constantly under threat. People who want the most valuable resource in the world, vibranium, as well as, just the normal colonial stuff. The people, the land, etc. So I would make the argument that even though it technically sounds like royalty is a higher station than a billionaire playboy, Bruce Wayne is actually the more privileged because he doesn't actually have a set of responsibilities. Everything that he does is by choice, except watch his parents get gunned down. But,
Yeah, I personally wouldn't choose that for sure.
You
So
would, I
who do you believe worked harder for their hero status?
That, of course, is the difficulty. When ultimately we're coming down to a couple of fictional characters and they're at the mercy of whatever writer has them in their hands. So for them to have worked hard, both of them have put themselves through grueling training all their lives, but they never had to worry about things like where their next meal was coming from, keeping a job, etc. Wayne's name was on the foundations and the companies that gave him all of his resources. T'Challa was of royal blood. Even if he failed the Panther trials, he was still going to be a prince and probably like a general or something. But again, I didn't read a whole lot of Black Panther either, but he was always in the background in Marvel because, again, vibranium. Ultimately, I think you can't really pin down that question fairly, because if Batman had worked all his life since he was first written, he would be, if he was 25 in 1939, he'd be old as hell. And T'Challa would actually be also old as hell, but slightly less old as hell. so just I think there they have a draw.
Okay. So if you take into account their completely different surroundings that these two heroes happen to occupy, who would you say is doing better or working harder for their community or their people?
Well, T'Challa, of course, as the heir apparent to the throne, he has the responsibility put upon him. Bruce chooses everything that he does because technically he could just sit back and relax and be a jet setter and whatever. So to say who is doing better, I think that is a difficult question again. But if you look at the societies where they live, Wakanda is by all means a prosperous community, even though it is still constantly beset by people who are after the resources. Ulysses Klaue, who I think kills T'Chaka in the comics, which is T'Challa's father. Eric Killmonger, who I actually heard Benjamin Dixon talking about the movie that he got to see a screening of, and I'm really excited to watch it now. But even more excited. But I think that if you just look at the societies as how they're being managed, Bruce Wayne could be doing a lot more to address the roots of the issues. But really, he just lets everything sort of bubble up, and then when a Joker or a Riddler or a Penguin shows up, he just swoops in to punch him in the face, send him to Arkham, where they're going to break back out. Again, he could pour a lot of money into Arkham's security and fix a lot of these problems. But T'Challa has guarded Wakanda as the spiritual and physical protector of the nation for so long. His family line has, and he's inherited that responsibility, which actually comes with the constant nagging of the Panther spirit and the ancestors that have gone before him. He's done a lot better at maintaining not only diplomatic relations with other countries, managing resources, and distributing wealth a lot more evenly than Bruce Wayne has. Although technically you could argue that he has the responsibility to do that, while Bruce Wayne does not. So I guess I would give I would give the success to Black Panther, but at the same time, I have to say it's not technically Batman's job, though. The lefty in me is definitely saying, spend more on infrastructure, Bruce. But
it's not his job, but maybe more of his responsibility.
Well, Stan Lee would definitely say it is because he has the great power, so he should also get the great responsibility. But he's a DC character, so.
Black Panther's home is in Africa, and you mentioned the Wakandan civilization. So how do you view the development of the civilization?
Well, again, after I watched Ben Dixon, I have to reevaluate a little bit of it because while Wakanda itself is, prosperous and I guess stable, I wouldn't say it's peaceful because, they have a superhero with an army behind him to manage that. But they pointed out that in the movie they show that while Wakanda has been protected forever and ever, the rest of Africa has gone just straight to colonialization. The reality of it is that while Africa is making a lot of progress right now, there's still a lot of problems, and you can trace those back to the resource plundering by the West and other civilizations. In the world of Marvel Comics, the question arises, does Wakanda have a responsibility to the rest of Africa, or should it open up its powers to defend the rest of Africa? Would that spread them too thin? And then the colonial forces would come in, wipe everybody out, and then get the vibranium. So that's a question to keep in mind. Whereas, of course, when we see Gotham, we're in the full late stage capitalism pretty much from the get-go of Batman's storyline. The management is corrupt. The very few people who have any sort of moral fiber, like Commissioner Gordon and Bruce Wayne, are just constantly ground down by their responsibilities. It seems like they're failing because they keep locking the same villains up. They keep having to fight the same battles over and over again. And Gotham just stays where it is as a cesspool of corruption. And Wakanda, with the exception of a few people who rise up and think that the established order is not going so well, such as Killmonger in the movie. And as I understand it, he's sort of like the main villain in the Panther series. They basically show two societies that have taken fundamentally different approaches. You've got the free market Gotham in the American capitalist tradition, which is sort of eating itself. And you've got Wakanda, which has carefully managed the sale of vibranium and also developed its use. So the resources of the local population have gone to benefit the local population instead of being drawn out for profit elsewhere. So
it sounds like they've been able to kind of spread the wealth among the population versus one person hoarding it all.
Again, I'd have to delve into 50 years of Black Panther's own development, but the indication that I get is that Wakanda is a respected world power, and their people seem pretty content. I mean, things could always be better. We're never going to get to the point where nobody has an idea of how to make things better. I think we'd all just die of boredom at that point. It definitely seems like the inequality is a lot less in Wakanda, even though they have a royalty and a nobility, etc. The fact of American capitalism is that it produces essentially a nobility. I mean, Bruce Wayne may not have a title, but he has several $1 billion. I mean, if a title is what you think requires power, then try buying an estate with a title rather than hundreds of billions of dollars. See which one gets you to you first.
Make?
Sorry, say that again.
Do you believe that this is even a fair comparison to make?
Absolutely not. Again, because of the systemic racism in American culture and as a reflection of American society, pop culture, and specifically comic books. Um, since again, Batman has had so many more times to develop. He's had to interact with different allies and enemies alike. He's had to think of ways out of different scrapes, and then also he doesn't have to spend a majority of his time negotiating between different tribes within his community, or I guess gangs in Gotham. He doesn't have to manage resources because he has business people do that. He doesn't have to make diplomatic treaties with other countries. As far as I know, most storylines of Batman, he basically shunts that off to Lucius Fox and whoever else is in the Wayne Company and foundations, etc. And he doesn't even. It's weird because you get certain ones where he doesn't build his own technology. He has Lucius Fox, played by Morgan Freeman, in the who's the director, Christopher Nolan Batman series. But in other iterations, you have him building the technology by hand because he does not trust anyone else to do anything ever. And it's one of his most humanizing character traits. There was one time when he actually took on the role of saving not only the world, but all different universes, when Superman could have done it a lot easier, simply because he doesn't trust anybody, even a godlike alien.
Okay, so without the vibranium, what do you think Wakanda would be like today?
Well, basically, I see two different paths. Well, I guess three. So either the Panther tribe would continue its protectorate status of the Wakandan tribes, because the Panther tribe, according to the comic book canon, the Panther tribe had been guarding Wakanda for a long, long time from the forces of colonization, etc. While T'Chaka, who again was T'Challa's father, discovered the vibranium. So they've only had 2 generations to thank vibranium for their development. That means that Wakandan science, Wakandan martial arts, Wakandan society had been successfully hidden from conquering powers, as well as given room to blossom and develop into what would eventually be a world power once they had a resource that put them on par with the rest of the developed world. So either they would continue that protector status in a slightly less volatile world that we enjoy today, where people might get a little bit hesitant to rip up a brand new country that no one had plundered yet, or they could just do it by corporation instead of conquest, and the same effect would basically happen. Or it could, because they didn't have the benefits of the greatest resource in the world, they could devolve into internal strife, eventually maybe even a civil war, and it would become just another country at war with itself, much like Japan became in the Tokugawa period, because while it was an island nation and they couldn't be conquered from the outside, they were rent by civil war on the inside. So that's a possibility. Third possibility is that basically they would just get some person who valued their own profit over the rest of their people, would find out about the powers trying to exploit resources in Africa, and essentially sell out their country folk. I prefer to think that it would be the first one, and they would just continue a shared resource economy where they would live in essentially leftist prosperity for the rest of creation. But happy endings are few and far between.
Right. So by shared resource economy, if they don't have the vibranium, what what resources would they be sharing? Would it be more akin to kind of modern, our actual world that we currently live in today? Is that kind of what you're arguing with that one?
Well, again, we're at the mercy of the writers. Since vibranium is such an overshadowing resource, by the time the Fantastic Four discover Wakanda in the first issue when Black Panther shows up, they've already developed hovercraft that's well above any other technology that you'll find commonly on Earth. However, again, since T'Chaka was the one who discovered the vibranium meteorite, they've had centuries to basically develop a relatively stable society hidden from colonization. You have to sort of expect certain things, that they have access to arable land where they can grow enough food to support their people, even without the sale of vibranium. They have enough mineral resources to develop at least a military on par with the rest of the African nations, because eventually some party of adventurers would go deep into Africa and find something there and want to come back and say, hey guys, got a brand new spot for us to go and tear apart. But since that never happened, we must assume that they were able to fight off at least a small band of European explorers. So they had enough resources for at least a decent civilization. And though they had a nobility and a royalty, you know, to have that kind of stability, to have all the land defended equally, you have to have some kind of shared resource economy. You can't have sort of a, catch as catch can, just capitalist, whoever dies with the most toys wins mentality. You have to believe that your neighbor is your brother and your sister, and you have to protect each other through solidarity to some degree.
So you bring up these, which I actually find interesting, these 3 different options that could have happened without the resource. And I don't know if you've heard about the 3 different Batman universes and the 3 different Jokers. So it kind of is fascinating that all of these could actually be what happens in all 3 different separate universes. I don't know if you've heard of that kind of theory.
Not specifically. I mean, I've read different stories where things are just vastly different. There was a standalone story called Joker where it was supposed to be more of a gritty street gang thing, and Joker gets out of jail, and Killer Croc is just a really big guy with bad skin, and they just tear up the town, being Joker. So it was a little bit more real world, but I'm not familiar with 3 specific universes of Batman, though. Wow. I guess I know what I'm Googling next.
Totally check it out if you're interested.